the soil, the oceans that we need for the food that we need to consume, the minerals that we need as inputs to technology and to infrastructure. And without these forms of value, these forms of natural capital, we won't have economies. They are the fundamental building blocks of our economies. But the ways, as you said, the ways in which we have grown our economies, our models of economic development, have been incredibly successful for global prosperity, but the unintended consequences of current models of growth are simply not sustainable on a finite planet. The amount of resources that we are drawing into our economies as resources, and the amount of pollution and waste that we're pumping out, whether that's through greenhouse gas emissions, whether that's sewage into our water, whether it's plastics into the ocean, is beyond the Earth's carrying capacity. And we know that that's leading to such very significant direct impacts for society, but very significant financial costs for the economy. We can look at that and calculate that at a macro level. But the way that that's showing up as we're breaching these boundaries and breaching these limits and undermining nature is showing up in very practical ways that are showing up in financial risk for institutions. Lack of water is leading to disruption of operations on supply chains where water is needed as an essential input for manufacturing or power production. The degradation of soil is leading to reduced agricultural yields. The decline of pollinator species is also having an impact on agriculture. So that's leading to direct financial risks for organisations, for businesses, and ultimately for investors. As you said, ultimately the reason for this is at the moment the way that decisions are made on an everyday level within businesses and financial institutions is because we're looking at any financial data, financial metrics that are not factoring in nature. Nature is treated within the economy as though it's unlimited and predominantly as though it's free. And the risks and harms are simply not costed in financial terms. We can cost them at a macro level. They're not costed into day-to-day decision making. And the result is, as a consequence, that all of our economies are fundamental for us. We can't do business on a dead planet. If we're going to protect natural systems, one of the solutions is to bring nature onto the balance sheet, to bring nature into the ways that decisions are made within business, to allocate value to it.
Right, so this was from the World Economic Forum in 2024, and this woman is going into, summarizing her point how these businesses, these economies are using nature as though it's infinite, right? And not putting in consideration how this financial system, this technology is destroying the earth. So first and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai Ba'ashim Rakakodash. Yahweh is who this world ignorantly calls God. Yahweh Shai is who this world ignorantly calls Jesus. Bahashim means in the name, Rakah means spirit, and Kodash means holy. And that's all in the Paleo Hebrew. I also need to give double honors to the other bishops and apostles of Great Millstone that taught me this truth. And I was watching that video. The first scripture that came to mind was Matthew chapter 24 and verse 22. In verse 21 it says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." And that's going into how things are going to get so bad that ultimately the people in power are going to self-destruct. And this all goes back to the Edomites being in power. The reason we see this whole problem with nature is because of the Edomites. Okay, it's because of these top banking families that are ruling everything. And we can read about that in Isaiah 14, going into the connection to nature. Okay, Isaiah 14, and this is going into Babylon the Great. I'll start at verse 4 since it's all going together. It says, verse 3, it says, "And it shall come to pass in the day that Yahweh shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased." Right? So when America goes down, the elect are going to be celebrating, saying, finally, finally, Lord, and you brought an end to this wickedness. because that's what this system is it's a bunch of wickedness. Okay, it's destroying everyone because the ways that they rule by are wicked. Okay, and when you live a wicked lifestyle, okay, sin, it leads forth to death. So verse 5 says, Yahweh hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted, and none hindereth. Right? You can see, how America is doing just that, ruling the people, with that iron fist, okay, that great hammer. When you look over at Iran, let's search up right now U.S. Iran news. Right now it says they've halted strikes, which I've seen, news completely saying contradictory to that. Trump vows total victory over Iran within weeks. Trump warns Netanyahu as Israel Tehran halts fighting. Right, so things, they're coming out saying that it stopped. And one thing about all these news articles is you look at the main ones: CNN, Fox, CBS, AP, Fox, right? And what are they saying? That it's halted. That Trump total victory. When you see that type of one-sided rhetoric, okay, you have to understand that the media is controlled, right? It's called propaganda, and especially in times of wars or scenarios that seem to be war, the American media is going to push always that America is winning. So, you know, back to Isaiah 14, it says, The whole earth is at rest and is quiet, and they break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. And that's the point, is that even the trees, nature is going to be rejoicing, because these Edomites are not going to be going over there to chop down all that land and all that nature for their own technology. Okay, to, use for whatever they have to use, which ultimately, leads to nothing. So, the trees are going to be saying, Since thou art laid down, no fellers come up against us. Right? So, it's beautiful how, the Most High even put that in there, how, in this American empire, this beast system, there's going to be mass, deforestation. Which, let's actually search up what country has the most deforestation. Right, so Brazil has the highest rate of deforestation globally, typically recording over 2 million hectares of primary tropical forest loss annually. Its deforestation accounts for nearly as much forest loss as the next four countries combined, primarily driven by agriculture expansion, cattle ranching, and soy production. It says Brazil, the global leader in absolute area of primary forest loss, heavily impacting the Amazon. Okay, and it's driven by large-scale agriculture and fires. So let's ask it, is this connected? Let's actually go down. Is this connected, or is the deforestation connected to businesses or technology? Let's see. It says deforestation is primarily driven by business motives, while technology acts as a double-edged sword that is used both to accelerate tree clearing and to combat it. It says according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, agribusiness drives roughly 90% of global deforestation. Right, so it all goes down into that agribusiness, sector. And the better the technology gets, the faster they can clear all those places out and install what the latest thing we're seeing is these water data centers, which ultimately all those data centers that are coming out is to essentially have the chip ready, have the chip be able to be used anywhere. Okay, support that digital system. So it says data centers are massive energy and water consumers, relying heavily on water to keep servers cool, particularly as generative AI workloads increase. Right, and the water is essentially used to cool all those machines, or else they would overheat and just fry up. So, it's something, interesting, watching this video, the deforestation. And, you've seen how, they're spending that too. Because here it is, they'll come and chop all these trees, and set up all these plants. And then, with all the CO2 and all the smoke going up, then they hit the climate change agenda. No, because we need to stop the smoke. And, instead of getting rid of all these factories, we need to get rid of cows, because cows produce too much methane, and that's producing the climate change, right? It's literally, I'll search it up right now, if you don't believe me. Cows, too much gas. It says when a cow is full of gas, or cow, methane, climate change. Right, it says cattle are the leading agricultural source of greenhouse gases globally. They produce methane through a digestive process called enteric fermentation, emitting it primarily through burps. While methane is short-lived, it is a powerful greenhouse gas that significantly traps heat and accelerates global warming. Right, so, here it is. Like I said, instead of getting rid of all those plants, you see the fumes coming out of the top. These people would rather take out the cows, take out even more nature. So, let's see what this guy says here. The lie that cows are killing the climate broken down in 3 minutes.
World right now is that cows are killing the planet. At the core of that lie is how methane is activated. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through the full carbon cycle for my dairy cows, from the air and back to the air. All the carbon that enters my dairy cows starts in the air, and I have organized this fog as a nice visual representation of that carbon. Let's take 10 carbon atoms from the air and follow their journey through one of my dairy cows. The grass in my field uses photosynthesis. That's a hard one to say. Photosynthesis. Grass uses photosynthesis to pull carbon out of the air and store it as energy in the form of carbohydrates and proteins. So when my cows come in here in a few weeks to graze this field, they will eat the grass and they will take up the carbon. Sorry if I'm explaining this like you're stupid, but none of the public question any of this stuff. One of the 10 carbon atoms will leave as meat and milk, which is then consumed as food by us humans, and we emit the carbon as respiration. Another 2 of the carbon atoms are emitted as respiration by the cow, also not counted as an emission. The remaining 7 carbon atoms are digested in the rumen of the cow by bacteria. The bacteria inside the cow's rumen takes the remaining 7 carbon atoms and converts them to methane through the bacteria's version of respiration. So respiration from the human, not counted as an emission. Respiration from the cow, not counted as an emission. Respiration from the rumen, counted as an emission. But here's the thing, no matter how the carbon leaves the cow, it has all started in the same place, which is the air. This next bit is where climate scientists like to gaslight us farmers and say that methane is not the same as CO2. So let's continue to track our 7 carbon atoms which have left our cow as methane. They have entered the atmosphere again, and them 7 methane atoms have 96 times the global warming potential of 7 carbon atoms. However, over the next 12 years, them 7 methane molecules that entered the atmosphere will break down into CO2 and water, completing our cycle. What this means is, if you have a stable number of animals, like this farm has for the last 12 years, as you emit the 7 methane molecules, 7 more that you emitted a decade earlier have just broken down back to carbon to be reabsorbed by the grass. So the net effect of the methane molecules emitted by my cows on global warming is 0. Factually, 0. And yet, in all the carbon calculations, them methane molecules are accounting for over 70% of my farm's emissions.
Wow, that was loud. So as you heard right there, you know, that essentially explains perfectly how the methane that goes out by the cows, the Most High has designed it how everything is recirculating and everything is in harmony. And ultimately this whole thing with climate change and the cows, it's a scam. But that's who we're dealing with here is these Edomites. So I'm gonna get one more scripture. Psalms chapter 82 and verse 5 says, "They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course." So everything is backwards, right? Everything completely. And it's only going to change once Yahushua comes back. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully this is edifying. With that, and give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, Ba'ashem Kakadash, and double honors to the other bishops and apostles of Great Millstone that taught me this truth. Shalom, see you later. Shalom.